The novelist Ray Bradbury once remarked in reply to a question, "Are you trying to predict the future?" And he said, "Hell no, I'm trying to prevent it." And I'm going to take you a little bit of a voyage and narrative now this afternoon about smart cities. And I want you to imagine, if you can, a city without traffic lights, where lanes of cars merge seamlessly from one lane to the next with inches to spare. Imagine a city so intelligent it can actually guide you to a parking spot, tell you when a bus is coming, switch on your street lights according to the weather, and automatically collect your rubbish. Imagine a house where the appliances know how to activate themselves, and they warm themselves up or they cool automatically when you're just about to arrive home or you're just walking outside the door. And only a few years ago, the concept of a smart city, or one that uses a complex network of wireless devices to facilitate communications between buildings and infrastructure, residents and service providers, administrators, it all seemed like science fiction. Today, with China increasingly leading the way, fiction is fast becoming reality. And I noticed Danny Alexander was just speeding out to China. And if you look at that photo over there, you remember the movie? Which movie is that? Steph, do you remember which year that was set in?
No.
2016, incept date. Remember, Chris? 2016? And then on to 2021. I'll ask you another question in a minute, Steph. There'll be a prize, perhaps. Okay. Today I'm here to talk to you about smart cities and particularly this new age of urbanization. London, with 9.5 million people, bypassed its 1939 peak only last year. And that's placing quite unprecedented demands on infrastructure and all those public services. And in fact, this month's Wired magazine, have a look-see, this month's Wired magazine looks at how London and London's growth is actually defining population change across the entire country. Is it sucking people in and impacting the prospects of the same Northern powerhouse, that nightclub in Newcastle that Steph mentioned earlier on? It's having an impact. We don't yet know how to build a smart city the way we build the internet. But it's clear from what we do know about the ways to build cities and create new technologies that we need to start to search for much cleverer ways to do it. And driven by rising urbanization and fueled by technologies such as the Internet of Things and data analytics, smart cities are on the cusp of explosive growth. And you've got Glasgow, and you've got Barcelona, and you've got Nice, and you've got New York City, and of course London, and Singapore, and they've already embarked on that journey. But the marvels of this new contextual age of devices and things is based on a trade-off. The more the technology knows about you, the more benefits you're going to receive. So cities can be thought of as sophisticated machines that support large populations living in close proximity. Imagine then a city where citizens live without the concerns about safety, a place where secure neighborhoods and police and first responders faced with dangerous or hazardous situations use those latest technologies to make smart decisions in real time. But with every innovation, a city's attackable surface, almost suggested by that slider, its attackable surface grows. The larger the surface, the greater the possibility for exploitation and indeed compromise. And South Korea has already seen attacks on its civil infrastructure by allegedly North Korean cyber warriors. So what are the emerging trends that we're seeing? What's happening? What are keeping people safe and property safe? And more importantly, as I noticed on the news this morning, who's responsible not only when a smart city crashes, but St. George's crashes. And years ago, I remember working in another lifetime in the casualty unit of the A&E at St. George's. But what happens when a hospital crashes? Who is responsible? Every organization, in spite of its best efforts, has a very porous network of interconnections spanning the entire enterprise. And each of those connections points is potentially a source for a data or a breach or a compromise, especially now with the influence of the bring your own device movement, all these smart devices we have. And once breached, these networks can or cannot typically detect any malicious or negligent activity, at least for the most part. However, before we add billions and billions of potentially hackable things and communicate with equally hackable data transmission protocols, important questions need to be asked about the risks for the future of security and for crime and for personal privacy. It's a perfect storm now of risk factors that we're starting to see. And I was only talking at an Intel event in London yesterday. The vulnerabilities are numerous. They're ranging from the power grid to the water supply to the ability to transport food and other necessities to where they're most needed. The current attack surface for cities is huge, and it's wide open to attacks. If we think back 130 years ago, it was Siemens that created the first public electric utility grid of 41 street lamps in the suburb of Godalming, as I said, 130 years ago. Today, urban environments struggle with hundreds of different systems and protocols that don't interoperate. A single building might have one set of control wires for the lifts, the elevators, another for its heating and ventilation systems, another for its security systems, another for its lighting, and a whole city full of these legacy networks presents an almost intractable problem. And our intuition has been formed by a set of experiences and ideas about how things worked during a time when changes were incremental and somewhat predictable. The challenge now confronting city planners is figuring out how to interconnect a naturally fragmented city infrastructure built up over time by using the internet to bridge these gaps in the urban fabric. And very soon, the Internet of Things is going to connect everything and everyone in a new economic paradigm. And that's going to be far more complex than the first and the second industrial revolutions, but one whose its architecture is highly distributed rather than centralized, what we were used to in the past. That narrow, familiar 20th century model that we all grew up with. So from a nation-state perspective, there will be winners and there are going to be losers, depending on how quickly traditionally top-down economies adapt to this new reality. And the potential for cities to improve performance and personal security using data and analytics is both enormous and it's absolutely unlimited. And this just takes us to a moment in history where the tools that allow us to drive performance across the entire urban landscape now exceed the application of those same tools. Globally, the speed of urbanization is now absolutely breathtaking. The city population has been rising by an average of about 65 million people annually during the last 3 decades. Since 1991 alone, the number squeezing onto the London Underground, as you probably noticed on the Central Line during rush hour, has risen by 50%. And it's the speed of that urbanization which matters. The scientist Robert Mugger calls this turbo-urbanization. And it's one of the key drivers of fragility and risk in the developing economies today, where, for example, in Mumbai, as many as 2,000 people a year are killed by trains. Today, India needs to build the equivalent of a new Manchester every year to keep up with the demand for urban housing. And we were just talking about urban housing a moment ago. Nearly half of global GDP between 2010 and 2025 is predicted to come from about 440 or so cities in emerging markets, and 95% of them small and medium-sized cities that many of us may not have even heard of and couldn't point to on the map. More than 500 Chinese cities have now embarked on smart city programs. So about 500 million people now live in these megacities. China is adding a megacity the size of London every 2 years. New York took 150 years to get to 8 million people. Sao Paulo, Mexico City, took 15 years to match that same growth. And as cities grow, they create the social problems too. They typically have higher rates of crime, much more disease. And before we start talking about smart cities, we urgently need to solve the problem of sick cities and safe cities too. You like that? It's a guy taking his crocodile for a ride, I think. Either that or it's lunch. We're in the middle of the largest migration period in history, and one can't help but notice that the poor are conspicuously absent in the digital utopia offered by the digital profits of the large technology companies. By 2013, about 60% of the world's population lived in countries with fertility rates below the replacement rate. In Mogadishu, the main age is about 16. The same is true for Dhaka, Delhi, and Kabul. In Tokyo, it's 46, and that's the same for most Western nations. And although it's not my topic here to discuss today, I have to wonder what the push for smart cities means for the projected 3 billion people the United Nations say will be living in slums by the year 2050. New slide. The founders of Uber had no particular expertise in transportation, but that didn't matter because their ability to build a software platform and an analytics platform. And the big clusters of the global economy presently are the financial firms and even artificial intelligence. You think of New York and you think of London. Pharmaceutical firms, you think of Switzerland and you think of New Jersey. Automotive companies, Teslas of this world, the GMs and so on, Japan and USA and Germany again. Gaming is Canada and Toronto. Anything in the sharing economy, like the Ubers and the Airbnbs of this world, or web-related, you think of California. London's becoming the Internet of Things capital of Europe. And what further boosts London's position is the traditionally strong footprint it has in the telco and the wireless and the wired M2M economies. The GSM Association and the International M2M Council have their headquarters here, as well as telco giants like BT and Vodafone. The sharing economy uses this combination of technology platforms as apps on the mobile phone, and they use behavioral science and mobile phone location data to create all these new and opportunistic peer-to-peer apps like marketplaces. And in the future, those with the most data, the fastest servers, and the most processing power will drive all growth on into the future itself. It's basically the idea that Google could do my job, and Google can do your job, and Google can do everybody else's job much better if they wanted to, simply by using their top-of-the-line analytics capabilities. Big data-driven management for cities is now an irresistible force shaping the future of the urban environment. In the past, cities primarily used their analytics to understand past events. And today, many of them are exploring predictive analytics using data to anticipate occurrences and outcomes. And locally, or local governments perhaps, used or previously used statistics only within individual departments. Today, they're gleaning new insights by combining masses of data across different agencies. And civil servants, well, civil servants typically reviewed performance statistics only periodically. Now they have access to usable data in real time, allowing them to be far more responsive and efficient. But without the intelligence to analyze and make sense of all that data, there are large cities heading for a mass data implosion, which rather than actually making them smarter, will probably make them dumb again. And some experts believe that in the future, cities aren't going to need traditional workers. Instead, local authorities will be filled with coders who can create algorithms to find statistical patterns in the data too. So all this data is going to create new and valuable insights into how people work and think within these new smart cities. And this information can be used to improve the city in the following years or the years ahead to optimize just about everything you can think of. And one thing is pretty clear. Smart cities will have a major impact on the amount of data created on a daily basis. And it will change how cities are both operated and managed. Cities in Europe, well, you can think of European cities. Steph, can you think of a European smart city? Oh, come on, think of it. Give me a city.
Any city.
In Europe.
Is a smart one. London.
London. Okay, and outside UK? What about Barcelona?
Yeah, Madrid.
Barcelona's another one. We start thinking of these cities too. I was in Barcelona twice this month, and I was joking on Twitter that by the time I've worked out how to get into my room and use the elevator, it's time for me to leave again. I feel like a rat in a maze. In Barcelona, you've got citywide operating systems. The waste bins want to have an identity. So do the lampposts. Everybody wants to be known. This is the future. Barcelona is playing with it, apart from having an absolutely fabulous football team. So,
but not as good as Middlesbrough.
Not as good as Middlesbrough, but for Steph, because she met us, there we are. Steph, I'll give you a Barcelona, I bought it back specially for you. Look, it's purple. There we are, Barcelona football shirt. Instead of Middlesbrough, you can wear that one. How about that?
Oh, thanks.
All right. Collect it later, there we are. Okay, so over there, a photograph I took last year of Singapore, and the centerpiece of Singapore's effort is a kind of digital crystal ball that acts as a kind of superpowered X-ray vision of Google Maps, and sensor data is going to be fed into this system, which is going to be able to store exact dimensions of buildings and a placement of windows and types of construction materials. And the government's already published a 2D online map of Singapore that allows the public to see current closed-circuit TV footage and check flooding and monitor open spaces in parking lots. And Singapore's also tested systems using citizen smartphones to measure the bumpiness of their bus rides, which can indicate that road maintenance is required. Gosh, we need that in Kent, I tell you. And other initiatives call into being satellite-based surveillance that will be placed on Singapore-registered vehicles, including those of private citizens, to charge tolls more precisely based on precise distances driven. It's also going to permit dynamic pricing throughout the city, depending on local road conditions. And even in Singapore, with its long and proven tradition of technocratic planning, smart infrastructure projects still move at a snail's pace. So let me talk a little bit about conversions. Just over 100 years ago, Mrs. Mary Smith of Lincoln Inn's Fields was what was called a getter-upper. She was paid 6pence a week to wake up market workers at 4 a.m. every morning with a pea shooter against their windows. Okay, it was an important job, but ultimately her job was automated out of existence by the invention of the alarm clock. On the right-hand side is my taxi in Hong Kong not so long ago. When I got into my taxi, I counted the chap had a special Perspex dash, and he had not one phone, not two phones, not three phones, not four phones. He had 5 mobile phones, smartphones on his dash. And I was trying to work out what he was using them for. It was Weibo and WeChat, and talking to the taxi, he had a Bluetooth headset too, and GPS and everything else. And although it's illegal, he wouldn't let me take a photograph of the set on there. It just shows that the city and the people in those cities, rather like a William Gibson novel, if you know Neuromancer and others, that people find uses for the technology in cities now, particularly in Asia and China, that we haven't thought of before. And that's a lesson we need to learn for the future. So the lesson there is that the street frequently finds new uses for technologies that business and governments don't anticipate. And that's particularly true of cybercrime, which is an issue that will concern us all very soon. And today, we're living in what's been described as an era of possibilities. It's a special window of time and technology which is driving the natural scaling of commercial activity beyond the boundaries which we've become used to. We're on the cusp of a technology-based revolution, a societal transformation that will be at least as big as the Industrial Revolution. And we're witnessing the birth of a new civic movement as the smartphone becomes a platform for reinventing cities from the bottom up. And then we move away from the regimented government-controlled data into a crowdsourced regime using smartphones. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we evolve a smart city organically? One app and one Uber and one check-in and one API and one BBC Micro at a time. In Tel Aviv, for example, there's an app that sends alerts whenever Hamas rockets are inbound. A company living in the Iraqi capital of Baghdad has reportedly designed an app that lists recent kidnappings and the going rate for ransom. Okay? So it's the app and the smartphone which is building the smart cities of the future. And as I draw to a close, we don't yet have a clear grasp of where the biggest risks may lie and how they're going to cause systems to fail or what the chain reaction consequences might be. And natural disaster planning is of paramount importance. In Japan, Panasonic's Fujiwara Sustainable Smart Town has a connected energy system which is designed to generate and store enough power for 3 days of off-the-grid operation. If you think back to Hurricane Katrina, that downed over 1,000 cell towers in Louisiana and Mississippi in 2005. And that severely hindered the relief effort because the public phone networks was the only common radio system among many responding government agencies. In New York, they now have a comprehensive citywide open data policy and a technical standards manual, serving as a guide for city agencies on how to handle and list any data that's considered to be in the public domain. And the object is to list all the city's public data in a single web portal by 2018. And a big challenge for the planners lies in not only how they're going to provide essential public services, but also manage information and create jobs and move all these people around cost efficiently in a world facing a looming energy crisis and with a low carbon footprint, and also how they're going to provide for the needs of that increasingly aging population I mentioned just a bit earlier. So we're moving to a world where the machines we work with are not only just intelligent, they're becoming brilliant. They're self-aware, or they will be. They're predictive, they're reactive, and they're increasingly social and context-aware. But let me conclude on last word with privacy, which for many is as important as safety and security, indeed, from a technical perspective. And some cities aren't making it easier. Privacy watchdogs challenged a proposal in New York that would give the city detailed real-time information about everyone using app-based ride services like Uber. The city would even get personal information of people who booked a ride but cancelled before the car arrived. New York's Taxi and Limousine Commission didn't specify why it needed that information and what it would be used for or how it will be protected. And at the other end of the spectrum, we've got Seattle, which is working to develop a citywide privacy policy that covers all services. And Seattle is actually now finalizing its privacy toolkit and evaluating its existing privacy safeguards, which is an education effort which they'll roll out to the city itself. I don't see any similar initiative in London, which, thanks to fears surrounding, quite naturally, terrorism, is becoming a real world-class surveillance city in its own right. So the question of who ultimately owns and uses all the data that will be gathered into the near future still remains. And the last word goes to Douglas Adams, perhaps. I may not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I've ended up where I needed to be, and so people can ask questions and I can sit down and tell you more about what I think of the future of smart cities. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Simon. I love the fact that one of the little facts I really like about Simon as well is he's one of the men who's proposed how many times to women? 100?
I lost count. I probably hold the record for proposing to women. But I lost count at 150. I know.
Yeah, there is a reason why.
There's a reason for that. We can go into it later on if you
Yeah, we'll leave everyone in suspense as to why. So you've got a glimpse there into the future. Fantastic to hear about how it might look like in the future, and I'm sure you've got questions for Simon. But before we go into those, we're going to take some case studies now, which essentially show how cities are working to meet the future needs of their inhabitants. So we're going to go to Liverpool and Milton Keynes for this. And we're going to start with Councillor James Noakes, who's Mayoral Lead for Energy and Smart City in Liverpool. So please put your hands together for James.
I don't know about you, I'm actually just more intrigued about how you proposed to 150 women, to be honest, rather than listening to me. There was a couple of points I wanted to make ahead of my presentation on some stuff that people have already raised. There is around connectivity in the north, and the northern powerhouse, or the northern poorhouse, as some people refer to it as. There is a proposal around what we call HS3, which is linking right the way across that M62 corridor, which we're really much more keen to see developed ahead of HS2, if truth be known. So that connectivity across northern cities to be able to compete in one sense against London is something that we're acutely aware of. There's another interesting thing about the difference between the north and south divide. Professor Edward Glaser, who's a professor of economics in Harvard, points out that there is no better indication of the growth of cities in the US than the average January temperature. And that basically people move to warmer areas, which I was kind of slightly fascinated by in the US and wondered whether that was the same here in the UK. And lo and behold, by my own, perhaps not as rigorous as it perhaps should be, my own bit of research, the difference between the top 10 growing cities in terms of urban areas in terms of population and the lowest is around about half a degree Celsius. So basically, look towards the warmer areas. It seems to be the case. But anyway, smart cities and what Liverpool is doing. You can get 10 people in a room and get about 12 different definitions of smart cities. So I hope you bear with the way that we've approached it in Liverpool. And as a matter of context, of what we do. Never use that map to get around Liverpool, I should point out. Although I think it's probably based on the way that my TomTom sends me. But anyway, the context that we are working in certainly as a city council, huge reductions in our funding, but at the same time we still have a huge amount of problems that we face. I'm not going to go through all of the ones that are on there, but you can see there are actually some of them are pretty typical of most urban areas. We just feel them a lot more acutely in Liverpool. However, there are also a number of different opportunities that we feel that we do have. There's a range of, there is a rising population despite it being towards the lower end. And we have a world-class health sector both in children's and adults. And why is that? It's because we've got some world-class health problems at the same time. And naturally, people are attracted to that. We do have some excellent universities, some of the stuff that I will touch upon a little bit later. And it's worth pointing out towards the bottom there, and I'm not just saying it because he puts me in my role, but we do have a supportive mayor of wanting to work on these particular issues. Quite how it works out when we soon to have a metro mayor, we'll wait and see. But Liverpool is traditionally quite an innovative city. It's quite outward-looking in what it does, and we want to keep that going. One of the things that we do have is a development that's between the two universities, Liverpool John Moores and the University of Liverpool, called Sensor City. And that's supported by government, and that's to develop the next generation of sensors. There's a bit of a focus on energy. There's also a focus on, well, actually, there's a focus on nuclear energy, etc., by University of Liverpool, and then pretty much everything else when it comes to LGMU, including being asked by Merseyside Police whether they could develop a sensor to detect cocaine. And then when they had to turn around to the Merseyside Police and say, well, can you give us some cocaine? We had the strange position of Merseyside Police dealing cocaine to people in the university. But anyway, but Sensor City, it's something that actually we're not only just proud of, we want to really make use of. So we're hoping in the next month we'll sign a memorandum of understanding with them so that what they develop out of Sensor City, this next generation of sensors, whether that is on-street sensors or to help deliver particular services, that we will use that within the city and we will use it within the city council. So Liverpool becomes, in a sense, a bit of a laboratory, although I can't say that to the general public as a politician, that you're living in a lab, but that's pretty much the way that we want to go to give, slightly selfishly, it gives us a bit of a leap on the way that things are going, but also it gives a great opportunity for the university itself as well. We also have the Hartree Centre, which is part of the Liverpool City region. If you don't know that, that is a Science and Technology Facilities Council facility, which is one of the leaders in big data. What you're seeing there is a representation of big data, the picture on the left. That is actually all the data. I think it's to do with Crohn's disease, and just through crunching through the data, Glaxo were able to find out a kind of fourth hidden bit of information, which no doubt they're currently enjoying the monetary rewards from. So we're trying to, we'll be working with the university and the Hartree Centre, hopefully over the next year, to develop things like a virtual version of Liverpool or the city region, so that we can test policies in the virtual world before we have to implement them. And that can go right the way through to things like planning and helping people see what the city will look like without you having to actually put a brick in, a spade in the ground. The other photo that's next to that, Sarah may recognise, that's down in Milton Keynes. That's the transport catapult. I just use that because it's an example of the kind of things that you can do. That's virtual reality. That's me with the headset on there. Bizarrely, in the middle of Milton Keynes, walking around a virtual version of Milton Keynes. No doubt there'll be other places that you can look around, but it is really being able to immerse yourself in that and be able to see the kind of things that you can do without having to invest so much as you would in the past. There's a couple of different slides here that you're seeing, which is some research that we have done. So I don't know if you know how Google Maps works. Certainly if you've ever used the traffic function on there, it doesn't actually measure traffic. It measures smartphones and where they're moving. And through their algorithm basically tells them whether you're a pedestrian or whether you're a car, etc. And it's able to tell you reasonably accurately how quickly traffic is moving. So monitoring those smartphones, that's basically what we did here. This is some of the main shopping streets within Liverpool, and we're able to see where people are moving. That's a 7-day analysis of where people are moving through. And I think as property professionals, you'll already begin to see where some of the benefits of that can come. I'm not necessarily suggesting that business rates will change because of that, but there's certainly that could be the direction that it takes in. And there's a couple of other examples of where we've done it in the city centre, so we can be able to see where people are moving through specific locations. Another thing that we are doing as well, which there is some government support for, is the way this essentially works is that when an emergency call comes through to an ambulance, it tells the ambulance which route it should take, and as it takes that route, the traffic lights change in its direction as it goes there. The difference between what you have now, because you have to basically get close, and sometimes they have a change, and not every traffic light is set up to do that. The benefit from that is that the majority of accidents that happen with emergency vehicles happen at junctions. It's just a way of being able to operate the city a bit better, I suppose, and hopefully save lives. Just some of those delays can cost lives. There's another project here. You'll forgive that pretty terrible diagram, especially seeing as that the cyclist appears to have come from the Tour de France, and we appear to have an American truck travelling down our street. But essentially, this is how cars can speak to each other. And Scraper-Wick are a company that's based in Liverpool, and they're part of this European project, which is cars being able to tell each other of the dangers that are around a corner that they can't see. So it's just another indication of the kind of things that are being worked on that are trying to help cities improve. We have things like Helping Hand app, which is trying to help older people access. That particular one is about shopping, because there's much better deals that they can get online, but they're not really set up to be able to use them like, say, a younger person would do it. It's not so intuitive, so developing apps along that. And there's another Helping Hand, Abby, is a young lady there who has, for the first 11 years of her life, found it very difficult because she was born with congenital limb defects. And whilst she got on okay in school, she still didn't have a hand, a foot, and she went along to a makerspace that we've got in Liverpool, and they basically 3D printed a hand for her that she's able to use, and now every kid in the class wants one, which is pretty great. But I use that as an example, not only because it's just a great story, let's be honest, but also it just gives you an indication of the way that technology is moving. That 3D printing, we already see 3D printed houses in both Italy and China. And that ability to just be able to send some plans across the internet and someone else is be able to use them is something that I think we probably will see a lot more of. However, when I was asked to do this presentation and agreed, and then between then and now, we had a bit of I wouldn't say it's a road to Damascus change, but we basically turned around and said, is this all it is? Is smart cities just going to be a better parking app? Because it's hardly going to be talked about in the same level as finding penicillin or something. So we kind of wanted to look and say, well, how do we bring smart cities back to being about people? And that's basically what we wanted to focus on now in Liverpool and the way that we're going to change. We're still mindful of technology, but we just felt there's something a bit unfulfilling about smart cities, that it was very technical, it was very efficient. It lost some of the reasons of why we live in cities. Serendipity is a big thing. I think that's why cities are really helpful, bringing people together. That's why Google bring people together rather than let them work from home. They have their campus. And we want to keep that going because that's where innovation comes from. And that serendipity is needed. There's a great guy, I think it's slightly related to this, a great guy called Vinny Gupta, who you could look up. And he points out that it's algorithms that are changing our genetics now. So if you bear with me here, the algorithm that operates Match.com is very different from the one that operates Tinder. And if people come together, so I fully accept there's some blank faces looking at me right now. If people come together based on one algorithm versus the other, and they have children, well, in a sense, the genetics is changed simply because of a very different algorithm, although he does point out that traditionally the alternative has just been alcohol and proximity. However, so there is that kind of influence and that kind of need to understand the way that people behave, that sometimes we've got to be careful about how technology is influencing that. Although we also have to be aware that technology really does change. I like to point this out, certainly to my Labour colleagues. You'll see the photo at the top, a very candid photo of Gordon checking his back for knives. So Tony Blair, when he stepped down as Prime Minister, the iPhone was launched 2 days later. Tony Blair wasn't even a Prime Minister when there was an iPhone. A month before David Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010, the iPad was launched, and now they're almost ubiquitous. Things change so rapidly, and as people who are trying to run cities, we need to be conscious of that, but we want to make sure that people are at the heart of that. And there's a couple of different things that I highlight there. I'm sure Sarah's going to touch upon a couple of these that we have to be mindful of when we're trying to develop the city. Driverless cars and the whole sharing economy actually has a big implications for how we operate our city and how people live their lives. Certainly things like that, they're not just nice things to have, but it could open up a whole range of possibilities to people who would never be able to drive up until that point. And in Liverpool, 44% of houses don't have access to a vehicle. We do have an excellent public transport system. However, this still does mean that people don't have same opportunities as others. So it can open up that internet shopping. It's already changing the way that people use buildings. In America, there are some very large property owners who own hundreds of thousands of apartments in certain parts of the United States who are already beginning to charge their tenants for storage of boxes because the concierges and the people who work in those buildings have stopped doing their job and they're just spending all of their time handling deliveries. It also means that we have to be very conscious about where we put logistics hubs within cities as well. So there's a real influence that's come from internet shopping. It also affects how the retail estate is being used, and we have to be mindful of that we've certainly noticed, not all the time, because shopping, if anything, has become a bit more of a leisure activity for a lot of people. But we certainly noticed the way that people will downscale shops because it's much more of a place to come and view where something that you've already decided to buy online or you've already maybe even purchased online. And then how we deliver our own services is something that we are very mindful of. There's that demand that's coming from people. Technology is opening up new opportunities for us, but also people are demanding that change, and some of it is because of that smartphone. When David Cameron became Prime Minister, the iPhone 3 was the bee's knees. If you tried to give that to a kid back in Liverpool now, they'd laugh you out of it. So that whole kind of processing power that's now in people's hands is really changing expectations, but also changing the kind of things that we can help them deliver. I won't go through all of this, but it's pretty much kind of the way that we focus on it in Liverpool. So one or two things to pick out with that is the ICT infrastructure. It really is just, it's as important as any other utility now. It's as important as putting a road in, is the speed of connectivity. The broadband connectivity in Liverpool, and I'll use the very technical phrase, is crap. It really is, and I say that as someone who's, in a sense, responsible for it. And that's partly because we've been let down by the people that government have said need to take this forward, but partly because we haven't really pushed in it ourselves. We really need to improve that, and that's something that we're working on. So we're looking at things, we're not the first to do this, but we're looking at things like how do we open up the ducting that we own, that we have space in so that people can lay their own fibre optic cables, because that tends to be the big cost. There's things in open data, which I know Simon had touched a little bit on. We have discussions about who actually owns that data. We have huge amounts of data that I'm sure even people in this room would love to be able to get their hands on, and we would like to use it so that we can improve how we run the city. There's a genuine question about who actually owns it and who has responsibilities that go with it. And someone who gets put up for election every 4 years, I kind of have to think about things like that. There's an element of engagement, which I think I've touched upon, about the need to engage people who would not normally be engaged in this. And so out of that, and I've just touched on them, the big challenges that we see that we've got in Liverpool is around that infrastructure, needing a wider definition about what we mean by infrastructure, that service change, and those expectations. And I would constantly go back to those expectations because people want things better, cheaper, etc. And we've got to respond to that. And then, as always, who's going to pay for it? So there's some there. And then there's some really big challenges. And I nicked this slide from a presentation I gave to my Labour group. That's why you'll see a certain line in there about why do we need a councillor, which I could tell you went down like a bit of a lead balloon with my colleagues. But it's genuine questions. There's no job out there that we should be thinking is, oh, that's fine. Yeah, we no need to worry about that. You've got to genuinely question everything that we do. The embedded sensors in that brick, which Liverpool John Moores University have developed, they put sensors in a brick which that tells them, I think it's 27 different parameters that they've got that comes from that. So they're basically able, the building talks to them. And so all those people who have been responsible for monitoring those buildings maybe have to start thinking again about what they do if already there's a very cheap sensor that's able to tell, to do their job for them. So there's things around blockchain, I won't go into that, but that's around smart contracts. And I know I've worked with some people in Liverpool about how does that really affect local government? And then going back to that, who controls the data? I think that's pretty much me. So that's a bit of a kind of little romp through some of the things that we're doing in Liverpool, some questions that we want to address, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Fascinating and humorous insight there into what's going on in Liverpool. Again, we'll have time for questions. That hashtag on Twitter is RICS UK Summit. Next, we're going to go to Milton Keynes and hear from Sarah Gonsalves, who is Head of Policy and Performance at Milton Keynes Council. So let's give Sarah a quick, warm round of applause.
Thank you. And I am delighted to be here today, actually. It's really interesting when a professional body invites you to something. I mean, I have to say, I'm looking forward to my marriage proposal later as well. I'll be very disappointed if I don't get that. So I mean, in terms of your experience of local government as a profession, you may not think of us as forward-thinking, but potentially thinking about the next election cycle, and James is very familiar with that, and in Milton Keynes we have annual election cycles. But actually, there are some cities like Liverpool, like Bristol, like Glasgow, like London, that are really starting to think about, well, what is the future of the city? And local government is not responsible for delivering everything, but actually they're the one municipal authority within a city that have that democratic mandate that actually has the ability to take things forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Milton Keynes. And when we talk about future cities, I mean, we talk about our Future City programme. I think smart cities, future cities, are sort of interchangeable. We felt that our Future City programme was more appropriate. Smart cities had a bit of a connotation. So that's what we decided to call it. And what I'd want to do is, it's really important to understand the context in which we were operating. I mean, all cities are different. You know, Liverpool has challenges, Milton Keynes has challenges. But we thought it was, when we got to our position when we were starting to think about it, we needed to understand the context in which we were operating in. And actually, I like this picture of Milton Keynes because Milton Keynes has not got a great reputation. You know, I was speaking to some of your colleagues today, and concrete cows was mentioned a few times. But actually, Milton Keynes is a green city. It's a new city, it's a planned city, and it's been a successful city. I'm just going to sort of backcast a little bit. For those of you that are not familiar with Milton Keynes, it's about 50 years old. It was planned, it's got an optimal location, it's approximately halfway between London and Birmingham. It's in that knowledge arc between Oxford and Milton Keynes, so it's really got a strategic position. And it's got great connectivity. It took me 32 minutes to get here today. In terms of that sort of knowledge-intensive cluster, that's something we're looking to develop as well. So, you know, we're having discussions with the National Infrastructure Commission around that east-west connectivity. We've got that north-south connectivity. We've got a really strong logistics sector based on that as well. So just to give you a bit of an understanding of the context of why Milton Keynes is where it is. So it's a planned new city, and we've had planned growth. So what you can see there is a population increase over the years, over the past sort of 50 years. And that's very much been around having planned growth, very much sort of looking at, you know, that unique positioning that we've got, but also there's other things about Milton Keynes that are unique. So we're a planned city, but we were planned in the context of having a different kind of infrastructure. So if you look at Milton Keynes, you can see that it's got you know, high-speed roads, it's got grids, it's different, and very much it's around that kind of planned economy as well, and it's had strong economic growth as well. So when we look at the sort of success story, and that's really important, I think, we've talked about significant population growth, but what we've had is really a strong economy. We've got strong jobs growth. We've got really strong knowledge-based sectors. We've got high productivity. And really, Milton Keynes has been very innovative as well. But actually, with that growth, and on reflecting on that last 50 years, yes, we've got a strong economy, we've got a strong regional presence. We benefited from London, but actually we have more people commuting in now to Milton Keynes than we have commuting out to London. So we deliver a lot of homes for the South East. We have, you know, we deliver about 1,500 houses a year. We have strong job growth, and we're looking to increase that. But actually, as places start to grow, and we've touched on sort of growth and some of the challenges that comes with that, we started to see that there was issues with that growth. So we're in a really strong position now. As I say, we've got those jobs, we've got those planned delivery of housing. If you look at some of the expansion areas, I mean, the western expansion area to the left there, that's 7,000 new homes being delivered. So it really is, for the South East, delivering well above its weight in terms of housing delivery. But actually, there are issues with that. So when we're looking at things around infrastructure growth, we're looking at things like transport. So we're going to have a travel demand increase of 60%. But actually, we could only address about 25% of that with practical improvements. And actually, we were going to be gridlocked in the next sort of 15, 20 years if we didn't do something about that. And that would really have an impact, not just on the fact that we would be gridlocked, but one of the things with Milton Keynes is inward investment is very strong, and that's because of the connectivity, and that's not just the national connectivity, but the internal connectivity as well. And there's also other things around sustainable growth. So did we have the energy infrastructure to accommodate all these homes? Would we have enough water infrastructure to accommodate all these homes? So all these things, plus as well, you know, reducing carbon emissions, things like that, we all started to pull it together in what was our Future City programme. And that was about, you know, broadly about 5 years ago. And it was starting to think, okay, where do we want to be, you know, 2050? Milton Keynes has always had a really well-developed sort of vision. We had a development corporation where we were able to deliver homes. We used unique ways to forward fund infrastructure and still do to a certain extent. But actually, how are we going to address those future problems that were coming up? So we needed to think about how we could utilise technology. But actually, and James has sort of alluded to that, we needed to be careful that this wasn't just about using smart, fancy technology to address some of the issues that we have. So what we want to do was look at addressing barriers to sustainable housing and jobs growth, because actually, when we talk about some of the physical challenges with housing growth around infrastructure, around energy, things like that, we needed to look at that. But also we wanted to make sure that we were addressing that jobs growth as well. So we needed to have that strong, sustainable economy as well. And we've got some structural weaknesses in our economy. I talked about, we have got a strong knowledge-based sector, but actually a lot of those jobs are business support type ones that could be replaced. And we've got a strong logistics sector, but as we sort of discussed, who knows where logistics is going to be in the next 25 to 30 years. The other thing that was really important, again, James talked about that because it's very easy to get caught up in what smart, fancy technology can do. But actually, we want to improve the lives of citizens. We are a local authority. We are responsible for delivering services. But actually, we need to make Milton Keynes an attractive place to be. We want people to positively move here. And we want to ensure that the lives of our citizens have a good quality of life. But also, I think what's really important, and I'm surprised James didn't talk about it a bit more, but actually, it's the leadership and governance that is really key as part of this. So in terms of enabling and using some of that technology to make changes within a city, it's the governance that matters, it's the leadership. We have had great cross-party political support for a lot of the ambitions that we wanted to do within the city, and that's really key, that leadership, that convening. There's lots of different other bodies within the city. We work with them and we convene them as well. But also what we wanted to do as well was trying to develop really good partnerships with people that we didn't normally work with because we couldn't fund any of this. You know, we wanted to make Milton Keynes a test bed, a city where we could test new technologies and see if they would work for us and address some of the challenges that we had. So we had to think differently about, okay, who could we work with, what are the things that we could start to achieve, and what do we want to do. So, apologies if you've seen this before. I mean, I do this presentation quite a lot, but we call it our innovation clusters. So this is just some of the initiatives that we started to develop as part of our programme. And I have to say, we call it a future city strategy or programme, but some of it is very much bottom up and top down. So some of these things happened by design and some of them didn't. So we started to look at smart energy. We have a smart grid. We started to work with the utility providers. We were really interested in mobility. One of our key challenges is mobility, getting people around. I mean, we've got very different challenges from Liverpool because Milton Keynes was designed for the car and just about everyone has got one. So we have something like 80% car ownership within Milton Keynes, and that's quite high. But that's because it was designed for the car. And actually, it speaks again about that future thinking. 50 years ago, when you're designing a city, what do? You design it for the car. So we're interested in how we can shift people out of the car, and we have to recognise the limitation of that. The obvious answer is always around public transport, but actually that doesn't work for us either. Because of the unique infrastructure that we have, public transport does not work very well in Milton Keynes, and people don't use it. Cycling, you know, all those kind of things that you think of, yes, we try and encourage, but we recognise we need to think differently. We need to look at intelligent, on-demand mobility, driverless cars, that kind of stuff. So this is about what are the things that would work for us and address our challenges. We've also got a number of other initiatives. I won't go into them in too much detail, but we look at smart waste. We've got Internet of Things, city-wide network. We use satellite technology, that kind of stuff. So it was just about, this was starting to pull together some of these initiatives to address our challenges. We have a flagship programme, and this is where we really started to take off in terms of what we were trying to achieve in addressing our challenges. So MK Smart is our sort of flagship programme, and it's a collaborative effort. It's with the Open University, which is based in Milton Keynes, BT, which is one of our sort of key industry partners, and we're one of the key partners as well. And it's funded, and that's one of the things that I think is very important. It's funded by HEFCE, which is the Higher Education Funding Council, but actually it's match funded as well. So when James was talking about who's going to pay for this, we have benefited greatly from funding to test things. And I think, when we talked about some of the issues around the EU possibly leaving, a lot of this is EU funding as well. So we've really had the opportunity to test new technologies. The MK Smart programme is very much centred around sort of key programs for transport, water and energy, looking at developing enterprise as well, so very much around developing that knowledge-based economy and looking at digital economy, and looking at improving the lives of citizens. But at the heart of that is our data analytics hub. So that partly that has been about developing that, it's about developing the infrastructure and the platform as well. And we see that at the centre of it, because this is about how can we use big data and analytics so our citizens make smarter choices, so as a city authority we make smarter choices, but how can it develop enterprise as well? So how can businesses use big data, not just the traditional digital economies, the digital SMEs, but other businesses, how can they use it for marketing? So that's very much been our programme, that everything's kind of been lynched on. And even though we have the 3 key partners, we very much worked in partnership with other partners. Sorry. So this is just to give you a bit of a kind of understanding around the breadth of the partnerships. And I think, again, that's really important. So as a city council, there are limitations to what we can do, but actually by utilising partners, we're able to make the most of the assets that we have in the city. What we've always been really clear about, and again, James did allude to that, we're a local government, we really are cash-strapped right now. We're in, a pretty difficult position, and we're always really clear with our partners, and that would be industry, that would be academics, that we can't invest in this, but we will help you progress your objectives if you help us. So it's very much about leveraging those things. We understood with industry that they wanted to test things in Milton Keynes so they could sell it on, so that they could develop business models, so that they could make a profit from it. And we said, we understand that. We'll help you do that. We'll help you test these things. With academics, it was very much about focusing on research and development and getting things market ready. So I think that's been one of the successes that we've really had. We've sort of leveraging the city assets that we have. I mean, James talked about the transport catapult that's based in Milton Keynes. We really lobbied to get that there because actually we wanted to utilise that asset so we could use it to address some of our challenges. But if you see the breadth of partners that we've worked with, it's been industry, it's been academics, it's the voluntary sector, and it's with citizens as well, and with the catapults. So it just gives you a bit of flavour of how we've actually progressed this. Okay, so I'll talk briefly, and my background is in technology, but I don't want to go into too much detail about it. But we talked earlier on about Internet of Things. So we're looking at how we could utilise sensors. And the great thing about Milton Keynes is, and I know I keep talking about how fantastic it is, but it is small enough to test things at city scale, but big enough to give you that perspective of an urban area. So we like to market ourselves as this urban test bed. And we've kept it pretty quiet for citizens as well, but actually most of the new technologies that we're bringing in and testing, citizens have been really interested in. So we're looking at sort of citywide sensor networks. We're one of the few places, you'd think it'd be a bit of a no-brainer, but as a local authority, we are responsible for collecting waste. So we use sensors on the bin to tell us when they're empty, when they're full, and then we schedule a visit to pick them up. We've got sensors in our car parking spaces. I mean, Milton Keynes city centre is effectively a huge car park. We have 20,000 surface car park spaces. So we're looking at a citywide deployment of car parking sensors so that we can monitor them and utilise them. We've got different types of networks. So we've tested different types of sort of bandwidth to see which works best and what was the cheapest. We used a really low bandwidth that used to be used for TV. It's called TV white space, and it was very cheap. And again, that was a really good way of testing whether that technology used. But the key thing, and I think we need to be really careful about this, is what are the applications that you can use for this? And I think that's where I believe there's been slight limitations. Again, James talked about, is it all just about a parking app? And you would not believe the number of times I'm approached about, do you want to buy this parking app? A lot of the kind of buzz around smart cities is very limited, I think, and it is just looking at certain things. And that's, I think, part of the kind of discovery that we're on to see, well, can we really utilise this? Can we improve the lives of our citizens? Can we do things differently? Or is it just about you'll know where to park and you'll efficiently get to your parking space? So I think that's one of the kind of challenges around this. People are always very interested in the autopods, and I did have a film, but it's not working. So the driverless cars and the pods, they always get quite a lot of attention. We're just testing this. We don't see this as addressing our mobility challenges within Milton Keynes, but actually it's been really helpful to be testing it within Milton Keynes, more because we're starting to see what people's attitudes are towards different forms of transport and mobility. So what you can see in the top left-hand corner, that's actually what the pods see. So they are entirely autonomous. And what they've been really good for is sort of discovering what's around the city. So they're effectively mapping the city as they move around. Again, we're doing the driverless cars as well. And part of that is around, well, how could that possibly work if it was scaled up? And one of the things that we're starting to find out about that is that, you know, there might be a tipping point with driverless cars where there's actually more vehicles on the road than less, which is the ambition of it, because there'll be a kind of critical mass around that. So again, it's really about, we're this urban test bed, we're utilising some of, we're discovering some of these technologies, and we're seeing if it could work for Milton Keynes. So just again to touch on where we are as a sort of city, we have to think about, well, what does this mean for our citizens? So we're looking at kind of education and skills as well. How can we take something about data science or big data and take that into schools? And that's some of the things that we've been doing. We've got an urban data school in Milton Keynes, working with 5 of the schools there. And that's about teaching data science. And I think that, again, that's that thing about thinking about the future. Data science is going to be so critical if we're to utilise this big data and data analytics. We want this to be bottom-up as well. So we're trying to make this